Welcome to Learning Photography with Duck. Here's your host, Duck.
Hey everybody, thank you for coming out and joining me this evening on another episode of Learning Photography with Duck. I am your host, Duck, and today we are going to be delving into Lightroom. And in particular, we're going to be taking a look at some of the color grading options that Lightroom has available. In particular, they recently did an upgrade on the way Lightroom handles color grading, where before it was kind of like the standard two-tone color grading, adding a little color into the shadows, adding a little highlight color, right? They've expanded on it, but they've also expanded a few other things that a lot of people aren't really familiar with and don't really understand the power behind them. So hopefully I'll shed a little bit of light onto some of these little hidden gems that Lightroom has available for color grading. And hopefully you'll learn something. Let me go ahead and just switch over to what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I think that's going to make it easier for you guys to see what I am going to be doing, right? And you can go ahead and expand that screen. All right. Okay. Everybody see my screen okay? Shake your head. Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Okay. So what I'm going to do is we're going to go into Lightroom here. Let's go put me on this side here. Lightroom has several options for handling color on an image, and they're kind of spread out in different places, and they each handle color in a slightly different way. And the nice thing about it is that they can stack on each other to really enhance the colors of your images. Now, one of the things, let me just bring this down, one of the things that a lot of beginners have problems with is editing their images in a way that that they feel really enhances the image. There's a lot of apprehension, I guess you can say. There's one of my screens disappeared. Okay, where did it go? That was weird. Oh, Barbara joined us. Maybe that's what caused my screen to jump. That was weird. So awesome, thank you for joining us. You're just in time because I'm just starting to get into it. All right, so if you can, just go ahead and mute your microphone, okay, Barb?
I will.
So I was saying there's a lot of apprehension on how to approach editing an image. A lot of people, especially beginners, they really don't push their editing far enough, in my opinion. So what ends up happening is that, in their mind, they're doing a lot. For somebody with experience looking at their images, it says, oh, well, you could have done this much more and this a little bit more and taken it to the next level. So hopefully today, I'm going to give you some tools to be able to take it to that next level. So one of the things that I tell people is overall, there really is no wrong way to edit an image. You as the photographer and you as the editor can edit it the way you want. Where the frustration lies is that you know what you want, you just don't know how to get there, so you just kind of settle for the best that you can do at the moment, which is fine because we all have to go through that learning process, right? The more tools that we learn, oh, this is going to be weird. Every time somebody connects, my screen jumps into the other screen. Sorry about that. Okay. So, like I said, it's part of the learning process. All right, so you have to give yourself permission to fail, I guess you can say, because that's how we learn. All right, we try something, we fail at it, we analyze where we went wrong, and then the next time around, we correct for those mistakes. All right, but obviously we can't correct mistakes if we don't have the tools needed to correct those mistakes. So what I'm going to do is share a lot of color-centric tools that is within Lightroom that will help your images pop, will make your images a little bit more professional looking. And if you are the type of person that enters images into competition, hopefully it'll give your images that extra boost and hopefully win yourself an award. Okay, so let's get started. All right, the first thing that we have available to us is actually, let me go into the develop module. All right, the first thing that is available to us is right inside the basic panel. And this is something that most of us are pretty familiar with. And it's right here at the very top of the basic panel. And it's our white balance. All right. And it's divided into two parts. We have our color temperature. All right. And, oh, what'd I do? Okay. We have our temperature and we have our tint. Our color temperature either cools off or warms up an image. And what it's doing is it's adding a blue hue or a yellow hue to the image to either cool it off with the blue or to warm it up with the yellow. So what it's doing is it's adding a layer of color that influences everything else underneath it. The tint does a similar thing, except it goes from the green to the red. And the tint is usually more for correcting problems with portraiture, and in some cases even landscape photography. Okay, but overall it's kind of it's one of those things that don't get used very much because the red and green tint influence is kind of a nasty influence. So it's used more for color correcting than for color grading, but it is available. The next one that everybody's probably very familiar with, but probably you don't even think of this as a way of color grading, is the vibrance and saturation. Vibrance and saturation. Give me 1 second. I need to start something here. Yeah, here we go. Vibrance and saturation. Okay. And these two sliders make very small adjustments. All right. So actually, let me go into this display here. All right, what I have here is the RGB color chart. All right, and actually it's got CM, Y, and K. All right, so what we have is a color wheel, which represents all the different hues that are available to us for color grading. All right, and we're all familiar with the RGB, which is the red, green, and blue channels. And if you've ever listened to me say talk about color, especially in Photoshop, I always say that the opposite of red, green, and blue is cyan, magenta, and yellow. All right, so if you add blue, you're taking away yellow. If you add yellow, you're taking away blue, because they're opposites of each other. Okay. For example, right here you can see blue. Directly opposite of that is yellow. Okay. All right. So if I were to take the temperature slider, you'll notice that if I bring it towards the blue, it's giving a blue cast to everything. Everything is being influenced by that blue tone. And of course, the more I go towards the blue, the more influence it has. Now, this is typically used for color correcting lighting situations. And often than not, you're not going to be pushing these sliders this drastically. You usually just use a very tiny little bit, a few points in one direction or another is all you need to do a nice natural looking influence. All right. So again, yellow is the opposite of blue. So if I go to the other way, you can see that we are adding a ton of yellow into our image. Same thing with the tint. The tint, we go green. All right. And then the opposite of that is our magenta. Okay. And again, you wouldn't use these this drastically, but they are tools that are available to you for color grading. Now, one nice way of using this is, here's a portrait of a buddy of mine that I took. Is we can take the overall temperature of a scene, we can cool it off by moving our white balance down. Okay. And you can see that it has really cooled off the entire image. All right. Because keep in mind, these sliders are global adjustments. However, in combination with, let's say, a local adjustment. So here I can grab a brush. Okay. I can grab a brush, make my brush nice and large. Okay. I can go here to my temperature, and I can brush on his face and maybe a little bit down onto his body. Okay, and I counter that blue by warming his skin tone up, so that way he doesn't look as blue as the rest of that background. All right, so if I toggle that brush effect off, you can see his skin is very blue. If I put that back on, now we have a more natural skin tone. All right. So that's one way of being able to manipulate the overall mood of your image just by working with the color temperature. All right. And of course, again, you have to think in two parts. You have to think globally and then locally. So you're going to make a global adjustment, and then you're going to correct certain parts of your image with a local adjustment. Okay. And of course, we can also do the opposite, and we can say, okay, well, you know, I don't want such a cold feel to my image. I want something that feels a little warmer. Okay, so now we can warm up the entire image. We can go back, brush on his face, and cool it off just to kind of negate the effect that we did globally. All right, so we can control certain aspects just by using local adjustments to kind of balance out any global adjustments that we make. Okay, all right. Coming back to here, the other two sliders that I mentioned is the vibrance and the saturation. Now, those of you who've been with me long enough know that I have a tendency to apply a certain profile to all my images. Okay, it's part of my import presets, and I call it my import, pop, and squat. Don't ask, it's just the name that I gave it that makes sense to me, and that's all that matters, right? So in my import setting, there's a couple of things that I do, and I increase a little bit of sharpness and local contrast. I balance out my exposure just a little bit. I open up my shadows and bring my highlights down. And the other thing that I do is to correct for how I see things. All right. Now, you probably heard me say that I have a color deficiency. There are certain ranges of the color spectrum that I have a hard time distinguishing. So for me, when I edit, I prefer my colors to have a little bit more oomph to them. So I automatically add vibrance and saturation to my images because that looks pleasing to me and I edit for myself. Okay, so the thing is that a lot of people don't understand what the difference is between vibrance and saturation. So with this chart, I want to show you exactly what each of those do. Saturation is probably the one that you're most familiar with. Saturation's been around since the original Photoshop, and pretty much every single photo processing program, including the little ones that come on your phone. When you take a picture, you can go into edit, will have a saturation slider. And all that this does is it boosts the saturation or the color of your images. All right, so over on the left hand side you'll see RGB and then CMY, and right underneath you'll notice that it says saturation. At the very top we have those 6 colors at full saturation, meaning they are 100% of that color. They cannot get any richer than what you see at the top. As we take the color away, we are desaturating it. And then at the bottom, you'll notice that they're all gray, meaning that all the color information has been taken out. What the saturation slider does is it boosts whatever color information there is, and it boosts it up. All right, so now if you notice, it's not doing anything to the top because obviously it's fully saturated at the top. But if you now look at the midtones right in the middle, you'll notice that the saturation level is the same as at the top. Okay, because the saturation level, I boosted it up 100%. All right. Where we lose it is at the bottom where it was gray because there was no color information there to begin with. It was only gray. So where down at the bottom where it was gray on this chart, it didn't saturate anything because there was nothing there to saturate. However, you'll notice that, let me reset this back to 0. Okay. You'll notice that as I move it back and forth, you can see, well, hopefully you guys can see it on the video, but you'll notice that the saturation level just travels down the length of that color swatch. You'll see the full saturation all the way up here, and as I move the slider, you'll see that rich saturation just traveling down. Okay, hopefully you guys can see that. So what it's doing is it's taking all the color information that's available and then just maximizing it, pushing it up. Okay. Vibrance, on the other hand, works a little bit different. It's not quite as linear as the saturation level is. The vibrance tends to target the midtones more than the white end and the black end, or the 100% saturation and the 0% saturation. So if I were to move that slider, you'll notice, all right, that the saturation occurs more kind of like from the center outward. All right, and this is designed to give you a little bit more pop in the mid-tone section of your image. Okay, now the one thing you're gonna notice is that I'm doing this with solid colors. When you take a photograph, you're not dealing with solid colors, all right, or solid hues like this. You're dealing with blends of color and gradients of color, all right? But once you start understanding where your midtones are, when you start amplifying the vibrancy in the midtones, you can add a little bit of pop into your images, okay? Now, the white balance with the temperature and tint, if you push it a long way, if you push it to the extreme ends, it's going to give you an extreme push on those images. All right. With vibrance and saturation, it's not as grandiose. All right. Except saturation when you pull it down. When you pull it down all the way, you're basically going to get a black and gray image, all right? Because you're removing all the color information, all right? But if we push it up, all right, what we're doing is we're, oversaturating it, and often that's just going to look pretty nasty and what we refer to as an overcooked image, all right? So you have to be careful with that, all right? Typically, these two are what I call salt to taste. You apply the effect that looks good for you. All right. Now, let's bring my buddy Latif back. One of the things that I like to tell people when you're editing with Lightroom, all right, is try not to get too hung up on the fact that there are numbers there. The numbers are more for reference when you need to refer to what you've applied, all right? But one of the things that I find that as you're making your adjustment, if you're moving that slider just a tiny little bit at a time, all right, so let me bring my vibrance down. If you bring it and you move it up a little bit, and you're looking at the image, and you move it up a little bit, and you move it up a little bit, and you move it up a little bit, your eye has a tendency to get acclimated very, very quickly with that small adjustment that you made. All right. And because you're making small adjustments, it's not picking up too much on the contrast between where you started and where you moved to. So one of the tricks that I tell people is take your slider, and this goes to any of the sliders here. Take your slider and push it all the way and bring it back. Okay? Because what you're doing is you're starting from the 0 position, all right? And you're looking at the image and it says, okay, this needs a little bit of vibrance, all right? So now we have a reference point, our beginning. When we take that slider and push it all the way to the max, we've now gone to the extreme end, and because that initial image is still fresh in our minds, we have that comparison. All right, so we have the beginning image, and now we have the really, really vibrant image. All right, so now we can say, oh, that's way too much. Okay, and at that point, we can dial it down to something that, all right, so rather than creeping up to something, we're dialing it back, and we can say, okay, well, that kind of looks good to my eye. All right, because now when you dial it down, what you're doing is you're comparing against the oversaturated one to where you are just finding that sweet spot. All right, I hope that kind of makes sense to you. All right, rather than comparing against what you did previously, and you move the scale up a little bit, so now you have that to compare to. You move the scale up a little bit. All right, so you're making these small little jumps, and you're comparing between these small little jumps. And because your eye gets so used to gets acclimated to that view very, very quickly, it's hard to make that determination where the sweet spot is. So if you overdo it and then bring it back, you'll be doing yourself a favor. Okay. All right. So anyhow, so that's a white balance, and that's your vibrance and saturation. All right, and these have been around for a long time, and you guys are probably familiar with them. All right, so let's get a little bit more into something that you may not be as familiar with. Okay, and that is our color grading. All right, now, like I said earlier, this is it's not really something new. Videographers have been using this format for a long time of color grading film, but it's only recently that Adobe has put it into their Photoshop and into, obviously, Lightroom. All right, and rather than just being limited to the highlights and shadows, we now have a third option of being able to target our midtones. And all this does is it has the ability of being able to choose a color that you can use to influence different parts of your image. All right, so now the three parts that are available to us are the shadows, the midtones, and our highlights. Okay. Previously it was just your shadows and your highlights. So you can do why am I having a hard time remembering the you can do a two-tone grade on your images. And some of the more popular ones that were around that were influenced by cinematography is that green orange or that teal orange combination where you threw in a little bit of teal into the shadows and you threw a little orange into the highlights. Okay, and if we go back to our color chart, you'll notice that orange is up here. The opposite is that teal color. All right, so it's using color contrast to really drive the view of the image. All right, where you use the shadow parts tend to recede. All right, or recede, and then the light parts of an image, tends to, protrude towards the viewer. So we put in a little bit of orange to make it pop against that teal colored shadows. All right, it's kind of gone a little bit out of favor, simply because it was just overdone. But that is an example of what you can do. All right, another example is that old time photo where you kind of use that kind of sepia tone for your images. That's another way of color grading. All right, so in this case, what we can do is we can say, okay, I add a little bit of blue into my shadows. And in my highlights, I want to add a little bit of, warmer orange color. All right. And now we have also the ability of influencing our midtones. Right. So maybe in our midtones, we might say, let's pick something in between those two, but still keep it a little bit on the warm side. So I might add a little bit of magenta into the color. Now, with this particular tool, if you notice, there are icons at the very top. The first one is the three selectors together, and you can see we are here with all three together. And this is okay to get you kind of in the ballpark. But if you really want to fine tune your color selection, you can go to the second part where you can pick your individual shadows, midtones, and highlights. All right. So now in my shadow, I can, because the area of work here is larger, I can fine tune. I can and I can pick the intensity or the saturation of that color. Go out, saturation further I go in. All right, depending on how strongly you want to influence the underlying color. And then of course you also have the ability to adjust the intensity of that influence. You can say, I'm going to take that cool tone that I'm adding to my shadow, and at the same time, I'm going to reduce the luminosity. I'm going to make it a little darker. Okay. And then the blend and balance is basically the blend between your highlights and your shadow area. All right. How much of the shadow into the midtones do you want this to affect? Right? So that the blue affects more into the midtones and lighter colors. Or you can say, I just want to keep it all the way to just the darkest darks of my image. Right? Also allows you to really control where you place these tonal values. All right. And of course, we can come to our midtones, maybe add a little bit of a warmer magenta, more into the red. Oh, no, maybe not. Okay. A little more into the orange. Okay. And then our highlights, we're definitely going to go way into the warm, okay? And maybe even just brighten it up. Make it look like sunset, okay? All right, so that is color grading. Color grading, all right? Color grading, I'll let you know right now, it's one of those things that a lot of people have trouble with because it's not overly intuitive. All right, so what I suggest is you really play with it and move those colors around. All right, when something becomes pleasing to your eye, you will know. All right, so trust your eyes. All right, then we have our hue, saturation, and luminance panel. Okay. And HSL, all right, means hue. Hue means color. All right. Saturation is how intense that color is. And luminance is how dark or light that color is. All right. So here, it's very similar to what we just had in the color grading. All right. Where we have our hue around the outside, our saturation, all right, going in and out from the center of the circle, and our luminance on this slider. Except this one is going to be a global adjustment. So rather than targeting just the shadows or just the highlights, this targets everything across the board, but by specific color channels. All right. And you can see that they're all listed here. You have red, orange, yellow, green, aqua, which is kind of like that teal color, blue, purple, and magenta. All right. So you can target very specific color groups and say, hey, you know, I don't, you know, for example, flower photography. If you've ever taken photos of red roses, you may have noticed how a lot of camera sensors have a hard time with the color red that is very vibrant. All right. And you'll notice that a lot of the color tends to be oversaturated. All right. So this is where you can go to help color correct what the sensor has oversaturated to begin with. Okay. I tend to find it with my camera. I shoot Canon. I noticed that my Canon cameras struggle a little bit with those very vibrant reds. Okay. So I can go in here and I can say, okay, well, you know, this orange stripe here on his jacket, it's a little too intense. Instead of focusing on his face, I'm being drawn down to this orange stripe. So I can go ahead and I can either go to my hue, right, and change that hue, right, which is not really doing too much. Okay. Or more likely, I can go to the saturation. It's really not doing, that's very intense, so it's not doing very much. All right. And then the luminance, I can take that and bring it down. Okay. But just keep in mind that what we're doing here are global commands. They're going to affect the entire image. Now, here's the problem that I find with this particular tool. A lot of the colors that we see in nature tend to be combinations of multiple colors. All right, so if you take photographs of people, for example, all right, you'll notice that there is no slider for Caucasian skin. There's no slider for Latin skin. There's no slider for dark skin because they are a combination of several colors, right? And the underlying color that most people have tend to be in the orange range, all right? So you have to be careful when you're in this part of Lightroom and you're dealing with these colors. The orange is going to really have a lot of different colors, all right? If you take photographs of nature with a lot of wood, there's a lot of orange in natural wood, all right? If you take photographs of furniture, there's a lot of orange in the wood that is used in furniture. So you'll notice that this slider here really wants to see and push that orange luminosity up. His face has really brightened up, along with this little spot of orange and this little section of orange back here. All right. So right here, we have a lot of heavy orange. Right here, we have a lot of heavy orange that is also being influenced. To be careful how you use these. Okay. Now, I know we're talking about color, but I want to segue a little bit because this particular screen or this particular panel also has a great influence over black and white conversions. All right. Now you have to understand, when you take a photograph with your camera, you're technically not taking a color photograph. You're taking 3 simultaneous grayscale images that have different grayscale values depending on what channel they're photographed on, whether it's the red, the blue, or the green channel. And when combined together, your camera pulls the information out and assigns it a color value. That's how we get color images, by the difference in gray values between the channels, okay? Understanding that, when we take a color photograph here in Lightroom and we say, you know what, I want to convert this to black and white, all right, we can take this, all right, let me go to this one here, okay? There's really not a lot of color here to begin with, but if I were to take this and convert it to black and white, and I go back over to my, all right, which is now called, it's now labeled black and white, but it's the same panel, all right? All right, you can see the only thing is that we've lost the ability of doing saturation, okay? We can take these sliders and we can manipulate our sky, our ground plane, all right? It's really not a lot of information, all right? What did I say earlier about orange? Okay, did anybody see any orange in that original sky? But look how much my orange slider is affecting that sky. This sky was taken at sunset, so in the distance we have a lot of orange that was being picked up. Okay? All right, so like I said, this is just a little segue. It's a little bonus tip to keep in mind that when you're manipulating your black and white, don't forget this section of Lightroom, okay? All right. Okay, let's take a quick break. Does anybody have any questions so far? Anybody have any questions? No? We're good?
So some time ago, I think we were talking about this, and I was shooting a a group shot and in a room, and it had kind of an orange tint to the walls, and there was really ochre orange carpeting. It was an Indian affair.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about how to maybe reduce some of that or balance that. So of these things here, since I was just trying to keep up, what would it be a good one to approach that with? It seems like the last one you were just talking about.
Okay. Well, you're actually talking about a slightly different animal in this situation. All right. So what I'm describing here are ways of enhancing colors. All right. What you're talking about is the need to color correct at the beginning. All right. And that color correction usually, well, that color correction would be done with your white balance. Okay. And the best way to do it, and this should be a habit for you moving forward, is if you have a gray card, let me get mine. All right. If you have a gray card, all right, I have the X-Rite color checker. The X-Rite color checker comes with calibrated colors as well as a gray card. But get into the habit of placing this somewhere in your scene and taking a photograph of it at proper exposure, all right, at the very beginning. All right, so usually you'll just take it out, take a quick shot, all right, and at that point you can do one of two things. If you are the type of photographer that as you go along, you like to look at your camera, the preview screen, and you like to see an image pretty much the way it should be, then go ahead and change on site, change your white balance to a custom white balance based off of that card. Okay. And then from that point moving on, your colors will look decent on the back of your camera. All right. If that's not a concern, and you know that, hey, it doesn't matter, I'm going to be color correcting once I get back to the studio or once I get back home, and open everything up in Lightroom. At that point, what you'll do is you'll open this up, the image that you took with the gray card. You'll open this up. You'll use the let me go to here. You'll use the eyedropper, all right, right here. You'll take the eyedropper and you'll place it on the gray card. You'll click, all right, and then you can save that as your profile across the board, all right? So whatever number this is, you just select them all and change it to that number, and you'll have color corrected across the board. Okay, and that's for color correcting. From there, you can use everything that I just discussed to enhance your images for a more artistic, salt to taste type of editing. Okay, hopefully that answers your question. Yep. Okay, cool. All right, any other questions? That was a good question. Kind of related, but awesome. Okay. All right, so far I've discussed a lot of the ones that you're probably very familiar with. So now it's time to dive in a little deeper and show you maybe some secret hidden ones that you may not be familiar with. All right. Okay, the first one is right here in our basic tab. We go to our basic tab, we open it up, you're going to see this that's called profile. Profile. Okay. And if we open that up, you're going to see a few. All right. Now, these will change depending on the type of camera that you use. Okay. So if you have Canon cameras, Lightroom will populate this with Canon camera profiles. If you shoot Olympus, it will populate it with Olympus camera profiles and so on. Okay. Now, if we look over to the side, you're going to see this little grid. All right. Or if you pop this open all the way at the bottom, you're going to see where it says browse. They both take you to the same place. I just find it easier to click on the grid. And what's going to happen is, let me close that up. You're going to be presented with a bunch of stuff. Okay, a bunch of stuff. All right. The favorites, these are the ones that I've populated. Okay. But right below it, you're going to see some that are from Adobe. All right. These are the ones that I populated into my favorites. Okay. Below that are going to be your camera specific settings. All right. So this is my Canon camera faithful, Canon camera landscape. So they match whatever setting you set on your camera for your color profile. All right. Those are right here. So you can switch them after the fact. Okay. So I've mentioned previously, I tend to be rather lazy with certain things. The less things I have to think about on the moment of shooting, the better it is for me. And the camera color profile at the time that I am shooting is one of those things that I don't want to deal with. So by default, and this is me, folks, by default, I set my camera to camera neutral, meaning everything's zeroed out. Okay, there's no color contrast, there's no color correction, none whatsoever. All right, because I know that when I come home and I open up those images, I'm going to be doing editing to suit my tastes, and they're going to be very image specific. All right, so a photograph of somebody's face is not going to get the same profile as, an overview of the pond with the garden behind it. Make sense? Okay. All right, so you have all of these available here. All right, and then you have your camera matching, and then below that, there is a section where you can create profiles. Now, Lightroom by itself does not create color profiles. You have to actually do it in Photoshop. I'm not going to get into that today because it is a process and it's beyond the scope of what I want to cover today. But the other way I create color profiles is with this, my color checker. All right. What I'll do is when I shoot client work, and because a lot of client product photography requires faithful color rendering, I'll shoot this first. Then there's a program within Lightroom that's provided by X-Rite that creates a color profile. All right. And you can see that I have one profile, and that's my current client that I am working with this particular color profile. So everything I shoot for that client will have that color profile. All right. Now, below that are some pretty interesting ones that you can choose from. And you can think of these as kind of like Instagram filters, okay? And if you hover over any of them, you'll notice that your main preview will display that effect, okay? So we have a bunch of artistic modifications, okay? Like I said, this original image doesn't have a lot of color, so it's not going to show you a big influence, all right? But here's a bunch of different black and white conversions. So if you're not sure of where to start, this is a good place to start, okay? Because with a single click, it will get you in the ballpark, okay? All right, and then we have some that are called modern, that probably just do some funky stuff with the colors. Maybe adds a little bit of contrast. And then we have some that are called vintage, all right? Just to give you, you know, I don't know, a vintage look to your image. I don't know, whatever the case is. And all you have to do is just pick one of those, select it, come up to the top, say close, all right? And you're gonna notice that it is now selected, okay? Now, the one thing I would suggest is in this favorites section, load up the ones that you use most often, because those are the ones, let me see, landscape. Those are the ones that are going to be populated right here in this list. So rather than having to open up that grid all the time, if it's something that you use on a regular basis, just load it into your favorites and it will add it to this part of the list. All right? Make sense? All right. So you might say, well, you know, that really doesn't do a lot. All right? By itself, you're right. It really doesn't look like it does a lot. All right. However, if we take something like, let me see if I got another image here we can use. All right, here. We'll use this image here. Okay. If we take this image and we go to our, and we browse, okay, and we go, let's say this one, artistic 4. Ooh, that's a little bit, yeah, why not? We'll punch up the blues on this one, okay? If we look at the before and after, let's see, okay. Before on the left-hand side and after on the right-hand side, you'll see how just with one click, it really pumped up those blue colors, okay? And then from here, what we can do is we can go to our, you know, our normal editing, and we can say, okay, let's go over to our hue saturation. Let's take those greens and let's see if we can make those greens pop a little bit more against that blue, okay? Maybe punch up the yellow a little bit. And now, all of a sudden, we're getting this glorious color in our image, okay? Let's see if we could take the green and yeah, we'll make it a little greener. Take our yellow. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now, when we look at the before and after, okay, before and after, you can see how our colors have really become richer, all right? And again, salt to taste. You're going to color grade your images to how you envision it, what makes it work for you, okay? All right. So that's the, let me go back to the develop module. and that is the profile. All right, the color, your color profile. Okay. Now, very recently is where I discovered this last one, and it became quite the game changer for me, and that is in the calibration panel. All right, the calibration panel. All right, and it's one of those things that when I read the name, all right, and I looked at it, and it says, well, this looks like it's something for calibrating the colors that are coming off your camera, because here it is. I'm looking at the RGB, the red, the green, and the blue channels. So this must be something to do with calibrating my camera. Well, lo and behold, was I wrong. While on the surface, yes, you can use it to color calibrate errors in your camera. The other thing that you can use it for is to enhance the colors in your image. And there's one particular slider that I think really, really works. All right. And that is here. Let me go to this image first. Okay. And this is the blue primary saturation. Blue primary saturation. We're not going to touch the hue. We're just going to touch the saturation. Okay. All right. I don't know if you guys can see the difference between these two images. All right. Let me see if I can zoom in. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure if you're seeing the same difference that I am. It probably doesn't come across the video, but the greens are more vibrant. All right. You can see that the house color is a little dull on the before image on the left, and you can see how much more vibrant it looks on the right. Even I don't know if you can see this, but the shadow underneath the eaves here, or it's very dull looking underneath the eaves here. And if you compare it to this view here on the right, you'll see how much vibrancy it has. It's gone a little bit lighter. Okay. The brown of the roof, if you compare the one on the left to the one on the right, it just has it just has a richer, more vibrant color to it. Okay. I mean, just look at the sky, the difference in the sky. All right. The one on the left has that kind of teal color, where the one on the right, while it still retains the teal, we've punched up the blue. All right. And we can see how just the contrast alone in that blue sky has really popped. Okay. Let me go back. All right. So this is one of those sliders that you can push all the way, and it really does some phenomenal things to your image. Okay. But like anything else, it really is dependent on what image you are working on. Okay. So if we take my buddy Latif, right? And let me just reset. I'm just going to reset that image. Okay. Let me open up the shadows. All right. Drop the highlights down, maybe boost the exposure up a little bit. Okay. All right. So I just normalized the exposure a little bit. I didn't do anything with color. Okay. I'm going to come down to my calibration, and I'm going to bring my blue up. Okay. And it's a very subtle difference. All right. But it just makes the images pop that much more. Okay. Oh, wrong button. Okay. All right. Now, you should ignore the red and green. Okay. In this case, you know, this particular image may benefit from a little bit of red and green saturation push. All right. But I got one image here that I am going to reset this one. Okay. And is it reset? Yep. It's all reset. All right. I want you to see what that little slider does. All right. Now remember, this sky was kind of, it's kind of blah. There's really not a lot of color information there. All right. Where is it? There we go. Okay. I took my red and I took my green, and it pushed the existing colors that were already there but weren't as perceptible to us, and it really brought them out. So now let me go to the before. Okay. Before and after. Okay. Now the before image, like I mentioned earlier, this was taken at sunset. So that sun had already dropped behind my line of sight, but not behind the actual horizon behind this hilltop. Okay. So there's a lot of color that was there, but not visible from my point of view. Had I taken the angle a little bit closer to the water line, I would have caught those colors, right? But because I was behind the hill, I was getting a little bit more of the upper part of the sky and not getting as much of that rich sunset color. But the color is still there. And this little section right here, the process color calibration, really, really brings it out. Okay. So what I've done is I've gone into the habit of coming here first and, you know, playing with these sliders. All right. Not so much the hue sliders, but the saturation sliders. Okay. You'll notice that it adds a certain warmth, a certain vibrancy that other sliders can't give you. All right. So there you have it, folks. I think that pretty much rounds out everything for Lightroom dealing with colors. All right. So we'll open it up for, let me stop sharing. There we go. We'll open it up for questions if anybody has any questions. Questions or comments? Yes, no, maybe? Did I fry all your brains that you don't know where to go now? Oh, goodness.
It's all experimentation. Move the sliders around until it looks good for you.
Yeah, you know, unfortunately, until you get used to what they do, yes, you're right. Yeah. It is. All right. After a while, you get to realize that hey, this image has, you know, 30% of this color. So now I know when I hit those particular panels, I know which colors to attack first. Okay. But like I said, I just learned about that last little trick with the blue saturation. I go to that first. All right. And I see, okay, what's this going to do to my image? Because I'm still learning it. All right. So until I get comfortable with it and get to the point where I can look at an image that says, okay, I have to hit the red and green to bring the yellow up. Okay. All right. So here's actually there is a good exercise if you ever decide that you really want to get a firmer grasp of colors on you know, within Photoshop and Lightroom. Okay, you have in Photoshop you have your color picker. Okay, if you set it to the RGB, so you get one slider for the red, one slider for the green, and one slider for the blue, you'll notice that on one side it'll be one color, on the other side it'll be another color. Okay, and if you take the red slider and you bring it all the way to 255, and you take the green slider and bring it to 0, and the blue slider and take it to 0, that's going to give you red. Okay? Now, what is the opposite of red? All right, so we have RGB, the opposite is CMY. All right, so the opposite of red is cyan. Okay? So now if I take the red slider, bring it to 0, and I take the green and blue slider and bring it to 255, I'm going to get cyan. All right. So now you're thinking to yourself, well, yeah, duh. Okay. Because I'm explaining it to you. But once you actually start doing it, you're going to, at first you're going to be like, oh, this is too confusing. All right. But stick with it. It's one of those mindless, stupid exercises that you know, you probably wonder, why am I doing this? But stick to it, because after a while you'll be able to do those sliders in your head and understand that if I add blue to my image, I'm taking away yellow. All right. If I add cyan to my image, I'm taking away red. Okay. If I'm adding brown to my image, I'm taking away cyan and magenta.
Okay.
All right. So you'll start learning the combinations when you do exercises like that. And I'm skipping all over the place now. Okay, there we go. All right, so yeah, at first I agree. You're absolutely right. It's a guessing game. All right, but it's part of the learning process. All right, after a while, you will notice that you will start making your selections a little bit more deliberate. Trust me, it will happen. Okay. And anybody else?
I was just gonna say, Doc, that you just said harkens back to my younger days when I was a painter. I used to paint for some pretty high-end interior decorators, and I learned a lot about color theory and color, and I was really good at matching colors. And you really don't expect at first what you want. If you want to make this color, that you would add this color to it to come.
Yeah.
Just saying, that reminded me of all that.
It's funny. Like you, my background is in graphic design. Okay. and you know, the past 25 years it was illustration. And it's funny because when talking with young artists, all right, and if they ever mention color mixing, you know, the one of the more common ones is yellow and blue makes green, all right. I would always go, no, yellow and blue does not make green. Yellow and red does not make orange. All right, simply because that's a very basic teaching tool that we teach kindergarteners. But anybody who's ever mixed pigments, whether it's for painting on a wall or painting on a canvas or colored pencils and crayons, you'll know that if you mix certain colors, you're not going to get orange, you're going to get mud. Okay? So, but again, it's that learning process of understanding which colors work good with each other and which ones will make your image turn to mud. So, all right, anybody else? That was a little walk down memory lane for me there, Brian. Thanks. I used to piss off art teachers that way. Well, you know, yellow and blue make green. No, it doesn't. All right. No questions? Everybody good? All right.
Thanks again, Doug.
So hopefully now when you approach your image editing, you're gonna now think about these little tricks and you're gonna say, let me try this. All right. What I suggest is really push yourself to explore a little bit more. I don't see a lot of exploration anymore. People tend to kind of post very safe images and they tend to be kind of a little bit dull. All right. So anyhow, there you go. Give yourself permission to explore, push those colors. Okay. All right. Did you have a question, Linda?
No, I'm going to say goodnight. I just had the worst experience with Siri.
Oh, no.
You were talking, Siri went on.
Hey, Siri, play Jingle Bells.
Oh, I wanted to shoot it. I couldn't get it off. Finally got it off, so I'm all taking it
Oh,
now.
all right, Linda.
Stay tuned for my colorful picture.
All right, awesome.
Good night.
Yeah, I've heard of people having their Siri and their Google Home activated because somebody on a chat said something that it picked up. So.
Yeah, Doug, I have a question for you.
Sure, go for it, Bob.
I'm a printer, so I'm used to CYMK.
Mm-hmm.
I'm having a little trouble. I figured that out with the RGB.
Yeah, so the thing with and you know what? Like I said, my background is in graphic design, so I used to deal with CMYK all the time and specking out Pantone colors and the whole 9 yards. All right. So and of course doing illustration work, working with paints, working with colors. All right. We're going from a subtractive medium, all right, which is inks, pencils, all right, to an additive medium, all right, where we're adding light to create different colors, all right. So the one thing that clicked for me was that RGB, CMY, all right. If you can remember, well, you already remember CMY, all right. You just ignore the K, all right. Yeah. If you remember RGB, CMY, all right, and you do this RGB, CMY, they're going to be opposites of each other.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. That's
So because they're opposites, if you add one color, you're subtracting from its opposite.
right. Okay.
All right.
I'll try to
Remember that part and it'll go a long way.
I have to retrain 55 years.
Oh, been there, done that. I know exactly. Yes. All right. Anybody else?
Good night.
All right, Bob. Thank you very much. All right. If nobody else has any questions, I'll go ahead and close it off.
I was just kind of watching Greg.
Hey, Greg. How are you?
I was kind of watching it, and then I got a little bit. But like what you were saying, I just have to get the program going if I'm ever gonna do any of this. So.
Do you use any photo editing program?
Not too much. They had this something called Photoshop Express. Have you ever heard of that?
Oh yeah, it's like it was like a watered down version. Yeah, that particular product's not around anymore, but they have Lightroom for Apple tablets, which is pretty much you can think of that as Lightroom Express. All right, it's a light version of Photoshop that's designed to be used by mobile platforms.
Yeah, because I don't even have a good computer right now, so.
Yeah. But, you know, what I tell people is, you know, every image you take needs to be processed. All right. There is no such thing as straight out of camera. There never has been. There probably never will be. All right. In order to get the look that you saw when you were there at the moment. All right. And not even just get that view that you saw, but enhance it with the feeling that you had at the moment as well. In order to do that, you need to edit your images. Okay.
Yeah, well, it's funny because I'm in the camera club, New Haven Club.
Yep.
And sometimes I think people go so far out with it's almost like more like artwork. You know, like
Yes.
it's too much for me.
Oh, well, yeah, but you know what? That is a very personal, subjective thing. There are people who are a little bit more, I don't want to say purists, but that's probably the better term. Is they like to replicate what was there rather than, you know, enhance it and make it look over the top. Okay, but you know, while it's personal preference, you have to understand that it also has to do with the intention of your image. What is the intention? Okay. Are you looking to just catalog what you saw? Or are you trying to imbue it with the emotions that you felt also at the time? All right.
Yeah.
And what happens is a lot gets lost in the translation. So in order to compensate for that loss, we need to boost up and enhance certain aspects of an image in order to convey some of that emotion. All right. I remember when HDR was the thing. And one of the biggest complaints among photographers was the overcooked HDR look. It just did not look realistic whatsoever. And it had that kind of like painterly look. But the problem was that everybody was doing it. So everybody's images were looking like everybody else's. There was no individuality, you know, because people were just, oh, this looks like a good effect. I'll click that, apply it to my image, and let it loose, you know? And well, guess what? You and 50,000 other people have that same image, you know? So being able to edit it by understanding what the tools do in order to get the feeling that you want. You know, there's a lot to be said to that, rather than, you know, clicking on one of those Instagram presets that everybody else has. You know, so.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you got a chance to join us. Thank you for coming out.
Okay, so you're doing this. I don't know, is anybody else still here?
Yep, Jill's still here. So yeah, we do this first, second, and third Mondays. The first Monday is Lightroom. Next week, it's going to be Photoshop. And then the third Monday is a general Q&A. Whatever question you may have on any topic that is photography related, whether it's about a camera or a tripod or flash, whatever it is, ask and I'll try to help resolve your issues. So, okay.
Are you doing private lessons through Zoom? Is that how you're
Yes,
doing
I am. Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be this format right here. You know,
Okay. Yeah,
but
and it's been a long time since I think it was a
yeah,
year ago we did.
COVID put the kibosh on a lot of events this year.
Oh, events, yeah.
Yeah.
Good job.
You're, yeah.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I work for a long.
Yeah.
It's tough.
Yeah. And they put on some awesome shows.
Oh, yeah.
Long Wharf. Oh my God. I've seen more than a few shows there.
Well, good. Come back when we reopen.
Looking forward to it. My wife, and back in the day, my wife and I had subscriptions to the Schubert and the Goodspeed. And then we would catch the occasional show at the Long Wharf when you know, a show like, I think the last show I saw there, it was a while back. It was Hamlet. And that is going back. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I may have seen another show after that, but you know, I missed 12 Angry Men. I wanted to see that. But I missed it, unfortunately. Now, unfortunately, Brian Dennehy's no longer with us, so. But yeah, they phenomenal theater.
Well,
So,
we'll be back. We can.
yep. Hopefully next year.
Not to take away from Doug's, like, what he teaches us, but Gregory, there's a course that I took on Udemy. Was when it's on sale, it's only $10, and it takes you through every slider and shows you what it is. It's actually quite good.
Mm-hmm. Who's it by?
What's it called? Udemy?
There's a site called udemy.com, UDMY.
Yeah.
And they give a whole bunch of different courses, and they do have a Lightroom one that, like I said, it takes it through every slider one by one. It's actually quite good. I learned a lot from it.
Cool.
But as I learned a lot from you too. It just supplements what I learned.
Oh yeah, no, you know what? I always tell people it's like building a jigsaw puzzle. You know, it's not like you look at the pieces once and you know how everything falls together. You gotta, you know, search and you gotta group things and you go and you start making those associations. And so, here's a group of orange ones, and then once that little group comes together, it's like, aha, you know, and it's those little aha moments, and they build up. And pretty soon, you know, you'll start seeing the big picture. So stick to it.
I've certainly improved. I do better in the competition.
Cool. Cool. All right, guys. It was a pleasure. Hopefully we'll see you next week when we tackle Photoshop. Okay?
You know what we're going to talk about next week? Did you pick the topic?
No, I haven't yet. You got a suggestion?
No, because Photoshop is something I don't do very much. I'm still such a beginner. I still mostly stay in Lightroom. So I just, you know, I don't really use Photoshop, but I still learn something every Monday.
Okay. All right. Well, maybe maybe we'll do something on how to take something from Lightroom into Photoshop and then back into Lightroom.
Yeah, that,
You know, something simple.
Because I don't know what Photoshop can do that.
Okay.
So,
All right. Yeah. All right. So I'll try something with that then.
okay.
Cool.
Thanks, Doc.
Awesome, dear. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you for watching Learning Photography with Duck. Brought to you in association with Milford Photo, your local full-service camera store. Located in downtown Milford, Connecticut, Milford Photo offers you a personalized shopping experience. From the latest camera gear to printing and framing services. And, of course, educational workshops to teach you the finer aspects of photography. Don't forget to tell them Duck sent you.